Hello everyone, it's Maki. One common theme throughout the Gundam series is war. Some works depict war itself, while others show war being replaced by alternative means, or explore post-war worlds and situations in which people are unknowingly involved in war-related industries. The franchise observes war from many diverse perspectives and incorporates it into its stories. Today, I'd like to share the thoughts of Yoshiyuki Tomino, the director of the original 0079 series. These thoughts come from an interview published in the Japanese newspaper Tokushima Shinban. Let's explore his memories of experiencing war and his views on modern social issues. Tomino's opinions are often quite complex. Even in Japanese, his sentences were difficult to fully grasp in a single reading. To avoid introducing my own perspective, I'll present his views as directly as possible. Of course, while it's important to understand his views, it's also important to interpret his words in your own way. Mr. Tomino often emphasizes the importance of thinking with your own sensibility. In his interview, he also uses the phrase, 80 years have passed since the end of the war. This expression reflects the way time is defined in Japan. Depending on the country, interpretations of what marks the end of a state of war may differ. For this reason, some people may feel uncomfortable with the number he uses. I ask for your understanding on this point. Now, let's explore Mr. Tomino's views. I was born in Kanagawa, Japan in 1941. I don't remember much about the war itself from when I was very young. However, I clearly remember the sound of bombs being dropped on my hometown and the resulting fire. Once a war begins, it is extremely difficult to stop. The most important thing is to prevent war from beginning in the first place. I have worked in animation production. I created science fiction stories about war. In traditional animation, it was common to depict aliens as the enemy. However, in the Gundam series I created in 1979, I made the enemy humans the same as the protagonist. If I was going to introduce large-scale weapons, such as heavy combat machines, then I had to depict wars between nations with military industries. I was then shocked to realize that it was necessary to create a cause for war. With aliens as the enemy, it was simple they could fight with the purpose of seizing the earth. However, war in human society cannot be triggered by such a simple structure. The existence of just one dictator is not enough to start a war. That's why I came up with a setting in which people, bearing the humiliating history of being discarded from Earth, launched a war of independence. I used the history of the American Civil War for inspiration and research. In doing so, I also emphasized the element of racial mixing. Thus, I created the story of a boy who pilots the humanoid weapon Gundam and battles the people who migrated into space. It is extremely difficult to identify the true causes of war. In the real world, we witnessed the war between Russia and Ukraine and the Israeli military's attacks on Gaza in the Palestinian territories. As I observe these events, certain thoughts come to mind. In international politics, I strongly feel that politicians have become so fixated on history that they have lost their understanding of war itself. They act based on justice from their own standpoint, opening hostilities under the belief that now is the time we can win. In the process, resentment toward the opponent grows, and the war becomes impossible to stop. Once weapons are in hand, letting go is extremely difficult. It's like the saying, once a human has used a weapon, it continues until that person dies. I was 3 years old when I experienced war, and now I am 83. There are fewer and fewer people who truly know war. After the war, many war films were made. However, when the creators have not experienced war themselves, they lose the ability to grasp what war is actually like. They end up portraying battle scenes merely as entertainment. In Japan, August 15 is called End of War Memorial Day. However, I believe it should be called Defeat Memorial Day. In the 80 years since the war, the media should have provided opportunities for people to hear and analyze the words of soldiers and politicians who forced sacrifices on citizens. Then, people could have learned the true reality of war. But that did not happen. Those born after the war need to know the truth about war. That concludes Mr. Tomino's comments. He is often praised for his directing style, which emphasizes realism and entertainment value. However, he also places great importance on depicting the reality of war. This side of his philosophy was clearly expressed in this interview. In Tomino's stories, the reality of civilians becoming victims of war is depicted directly. Among Gundam fans, one of the most unforgettable scenes is surely from Gundam F91. It's the moment when a shell casing ejected from a mobile suit's weapon collides with a civilian's head and kills her. From the perspective of robots fighting cool battles for entertainment, this scene would be unnecessary. However, Tomino portrayed this scene carefully, in line with his beliefs. The brief, it is drawn in detail by the animator's own hands. A giant shell casing crashes into the head of a woman holding a baby. Struck by a massive burning hot shell, she may have died instantly. At the same time, though it looks as though she twisted her body to avoid a situation in which the baby would be slammed against the ground. This scene is not explicitly explained. Each viewer should interpret it as they see fit. Even if one interprets it as pure coincidence that the baby wasn't crushed against the ground or beneath the mother's body, that interpretation would not be incorrect. Personally, I feel that the mother was almost instantly killed, but in her fading consciousness, she tried to protect her baby. I interpret this scene as representing civilians who become victims of war and the parents' love for their child, trying to protect them until the very last moment. Describing this scene as simply beautiful might be a bit shallow. Yet, the fact that it contains a reality that could happen and room for many interpretations by viewers in just a brief instant makes it tragic yet beautiful to me. Also, in the original 0079, there is a scene of an old man stealing food from a young child. This scene is not explained in detail either. As before, it is left to the interpretation of each viewer. Was this old man evil at his core? Or was he usually gentle and kind but driven by hunger and desperation to steal? Was he truly a villain? Why did the old man sit next to the child in the first place? Did he intend to steal the food from the start? Or did he sit there to comfort a lonely child who had lost his parents? Maybe he had good intentions, but the sight of food and his extreme hunger shook his resolve, causing him to steal. How would you interpret this scene? Once again, an event caused by war is vividly depicted in a brief moment. What were your thoughts on Mr. Tomino's words? As I mentioned earlier, I tried to translate his words as directly as possible. It may not be easy to understand their full meaning immediately. I am not confident that I fully grasp his words at this point either. However, based on my interpretation, I feel that Mr. Tomino is telling us if you don't understand, research and think for yourself. He values not just knowing things as knowledge, but also seeing, feeling, and thinking for yourself. Even in the final scene of Rikamizenji, the protagonist takes action to experience the mountains for himself. By learning about Tomino's ideas and interpreting them in your own way, you may gain new insights while watching the Gundam series. Of course, even Gundam series not made directly by Tomino often reflect the philosophies reinterpreted and reconstructed by each creator from his ideas. This makes his thoughts a valuable point of reference for enjoying future Gundam series. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I'll see you again in the next program.